Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And as gaming evolves and has had a long history and probably a long future of community, connectedness, and the internet, there are great highs and there are deep lows. And not to be one who focuses on the negative, we need to talk about the lows a little bit.
Yeah, we tend to keep it fairly light when we can here, but up at the front, I am going to mention that we are going to be talking about some triggering language that you may not want to listen to, and that's totally fine, and I totally get it. But there's a dark part of online community and online gamers, mostly young white males, that use language that is unacceptable. And some people who are older use it not knowing even the hurt behind it. And so I think it's important to talk about it, because without naming names, I've had recent interactions with people using hurtful language, not realizing that it was hurtful. And I think it's important to talk about. I mean, and this goes beyond the, young white boy using the N-word, which we know is inappropriate, and things like that. Those are kind of obvious. Using the word gay as a slur, which is often found on internet culture. Those have been around for a while, and those are also often most talked about. But it was a common vernacular for a long time, even when I was a young gamer first starting to play online, to equate being decimated in a game by being raped. And so this is the part where if you don't want to hear that word again or think about it, feel free to turn off this episode. No harm, no foul. But we're going to talk about it a little bit, because I think it's important to note that A, that is unacceptable. But B, I was a gamer who used it for a long time until I met people who had been assaulted, who had been victims of it. And it changed my perspective on it, because I was like, oh, this word has meaning. It really hurts people. Which is kind of obvious post facto, but wasn't obvious when you have no exposure to the word other than its definition, and that's it. No real life connection.
Well, yeah, when you have a very large pond of an internet community and there are a word like that is a powerful word, because it is attached to very strong acts, completely devoid of morality. It is a strong act, and it is one done out of a need for control. It invokes a loss of control. And one can make big arguments for young gamers and people who continue the language of young gamers into adulthood as a means of enacting strong control from a feeling of powerlessness. There is a narrative of gamers being nerds, or gamers being looked down upon, or being made fun of. Everyone gets made fun of in some way or another. This is not to qualify one's experience like that, but with the power of anonymity, or a persona that you get to create, you can then, with just a few words, elicit a very strong reaction. And good, bad, or indifferent, that feels powerful. And yeah, it does seem a little... It feels silly to say, okay, yeah, no, I also was definitely somebody who would say that upon being beaten, upon beating somebody. And it's one of those, not till I met somebody who had been a victim of assault did I, realize what... It's that fact of, you say a lot of horrible things when you're younger.
Yeah.
Middle school is not a good time.
Not for anyone who's listening to this show, probably.
Middle school is not good for the middle schoolers. Middle school is not good for people who have to deal with those middle schoolers.
Also true.
Yeah. And it is that sort of age of, I can be adult-ish and look at all of these edgy things that elicit strong reactions, and you just can't handle it because you don't, get good kind of thing. But a lot of words and a lot of actions and a lot of experiential things have no grounding, have no connection. And I'm not saying, I would love it if every 11-year-old, 12-year-old in the world has no actual experiential connection to the word rape.
Right.
But, I mean, there are exceptions to that. But it is because that, and there's probably a lot who don't, that is an example of something that can get thrown around very casually and lightly by those who don't understand its implications.
And now my recent experience was with a man who was well into adulthood and has kids. And so for him to use the word A means that maybe he has not encountered anyone who has. And like, however that you take meaning to that, he doesn't have a frame of reference. Some people also, words and their meanings don't necessarily impact them in the same emotional way they may impact others.
Yes, words do. Words can mean the same thing, but mean different things to different people.
Right. And so when I called him on it, and saying there's a better way to describe that act, he said absolutely, and we moved on. And it wasn't a big deal. I don't know if that means he'll never do it again, but he at least knows how I felt about it. And if he does it again, I'd probably mention it again. And I think what's interesting to me is, like, I wouldn't necessarily forget the young kids who use it in that way, but I at least understand why they may have a disconnect, because if they haven't been or don't know anyone who has, the assumption is the word has a different impact to them than those who are more closely tied to it or related to it. And so...
But then it kind of becomes gamer shop talk.
Right.
In a way, because yeah.
And as we've discussed recently, like, most of that locker room talk is not okay. We have a president who glorified bullshit like that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I think more than ever it's important to engage in talking about this language. Now, at the end of the day, I mean, we shouldn't be using hurtful language of any kind when playing a game with someone. Like, trash talk is fine. Everybody trash talks. But the minute it gets personal or you start using violent words like that, it escalates it to a level that I think is personally unnecessary and I think could widely be agreed upon is unacceptable. I mean,
if nothing else, it's thoughtless. I've read wonderful examples of completely unhateful trash talk.
Yeah.
And one of my personal favorites, I read it in a Tumblr post. I can't give credit to whomever, but I absolutely love it. Like that sort of angry at somebody, you're terrible at the game. I am going to punch you and knock all your teeth out and plant them in your grandparents' garden. And maybe then your grandparents can have grandchildren to be proud of.
That's clever. That's actually very clever.
It is still violent and over the top, but it's one that is just absurdly cartoonish.
Yeah.
And any aggressive language you use, you run a risk of encroaching into somebody's trauma. That is life. And we can't sit here and say, well, we can never say anything ever again, ever at all. No, that's overcorrecting and that's ignoring the issue.
Right.
The fact is that, a lot of disconnected, hurtful things are said, often in youth, and then it becomes a piece of gaming culture. And sometimes we may never even say those words or consciously think not to say those words in most other aspects of our lives. But because gaming is something that connects deeper for a lot of people, and I don't mean as like a conceptual thing, but as I've been playing video games since I could hold a controller. I haven't been banking for that long. I haven't been working a paying job for that long. I haven't been riding public transit for that long. And so there's new instances where I can refresh my language, refresh my persona in that way. My way of Geoff adult, Geoff actor, Geoff, man walking the streets of New York City, rather than Geoff gamer, which goes back pretty far. And that is where a lot of this kind of oversight occurs. Doesn't forgive it. But I'm trying to understand where it comes from, and all of us.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of it comes from popular culture and how other things are mentioned. Like, for example, when I was a kid or even a young adult, I didn't know any trans people at all. I just didn't.
And if we did, we didn't know they were.
Right. But so the word tranny was pretty common when I was growing up to describe someone who was transgender, and it was a fairly hurtful term. I would say probably definitely a hurtful term. But it's one of those things that I just never thought about. A lot of comedians use that word. It was in punk and rock songs. And so like, I just never really thought about it. It was part of vernacular. It wasn't until I met people in the community where it was like, oh shit, this is actually not a good thing to say. This is not a thing that a trans person wants to be called.
Right. And there's bigger platforms for that language to be put out into the world as
Right.
well. Like, again, in the 90s, it's not forgive the time or anything like that. It's like that was almost that's the most popular term for it, or that's the most, but that was also coached in the idea of someone acting outside of their gender role as humorous, absurd travesties in that sense. And so, fortunately, in recent years, that the platform has changed, and we can hopefully change the language a bit. And we can't grandfather that stuff anymore. We never could.
No. Yeah, and I think also like there is a level of hurtfulness on the internet in general, as we've seen. There's a baseline of toxic masculinity in our country. There's also a baseline of just toxic behavior in our country and other countries. And so I think that a lot of gaming has magnified that in certain situations. And it doesn't even always have to deal with violent gaming. I think online communities and anonymity breeds this superhero syndrome where you can say whatever you want. Like, there are definitely people who have used the word rape to depict decimation in gaming without thinking of the impact the words have. And that doesn't necessarily forgive it, but it's definitely different than a person who says it to someone who they know has been a victim, who have maybe complained about it just to make it worse. Think about all the horrible shit that a lot of women in media had to deal with during Gamergate. Like, those are people who are not saying hurtful things because they don't know the meaning. It's quite the opposite. They're saying hurtful things about and using triggering language because they know the meaning and because they want to instill this fear, because they think it's okay when they're hiding behind the internet.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's not. And like, a lot of, for me, the test is, if I want to trash talk with someone, I want to trash talk in a way that I would feel just as comfortable saying those things to a person's face as I would on the internet.
Yeah. And I appreciate when trash talk is done to my face.
Right.
Because also, it can be way more personalized that way.
Yes.
In Dungeons and Dragons, whenever any game I'm in, I don't know what is up. I am terrible at rolling d20s. Not that I am incapable of taking d20, putting in hand, and rolling in a rolling motion onto a table and it lands okay. I'm good at that, but having high numbers is not a thing that happens to me. And so the very notion that anytime a big roll comes down to me and everybody just goes, we're doomed, it's good. Right. And that's the simple version of it. There's definitely been way worse things said to me, but they are with knowledge of who I am. They are with people that we know each other. And
right.
there's enough that I can be pushed and this is okay. Because it just is.
Yeah. I mean, talking about our certain point of view family, I crack jokes at the expense of just about everyone at part of the team because I know them well enough to know that they are game to joke around and that they have a good sense of humor. And more specifically, they're not going to use hurtful language to hurt each other. Like, we make fun of Ben for being old because he's the oldest member of the team. Although I don't even know if that's true. Addie could be older than him for all I know. We just assume he is.
He just moisturizes.
Right, exactly. But like, when I poke fun at Ben's age, he doesn't think twice about poking fun at me because we understand the rapport. But also, if I had said something hurtful or if he had, and one of us called the other on it, we would apologize. Like, there's no disconnect between the language we're using and the intent we're using it for. We totally understand what we're saying, why we're saying it, and it's all in good fun. Now, if I had met someone, if someone had joined the certain POV team who didn't get on with that and didn't like joking around that way, then I wouldn't do it,
Right. And that comes back to a very strong thing about jokes, about language, about things said. It is there is a disconnect. There is a difference between what you intend and what is received. Right. And if you intend a joke to be funny and nobody laughs, then the joke is not funny. Yeah. And so if you are doing trash talk to a complete stranger, there isn't that wiggle room of foreknowledge to work with. And if you think it's playful ribbing, but is in fact hateful and hurtful, I'm sorry, whatever you intended, that's what it ended up being. And there's a difficulty of accountability, not just in terms of internet anonymity. There is also the fact that whether it is rooted in toxic masculinity, whether it is rooted in whatever, there is very little inclination to back down. And admitting fault, which is a mature move, feels and can be made to seem like giving ground. And like hell anybody's going to do that. Fuck you. I'm going to dig in even deeper on that. And this is where it also goes wrong.
Yeah. I think also part of it is this idea that there's a level of rightness that exists on the internet, especially in online gaming communities, that didn't exist before. There's a perfect example of hateful culture in gaming that was a game that I stopped playing because of it, and it was a good game, which is League of Legends. League of Legends was a game that if you weren't good playing online, people pounced on you and were really mean and didn't give you a chance. And like, I get the point, like you want to weed out the weak players, but it made for an unfun experience. So when Blizzard released their own style game, but everyone are past Blizzard players, there's a sense of community, people working together, it was an easy choice to pick that game and never go back to the other one because I had fun when I wasn't getting crapped on.
Yeah, it's why I don't really play online games. I've never gotten into online first-person shooters because I've never been fantastic at them. And stuff like Team Fortress 2 or Overwatch, I'm interested in them. I really am. But I don't need to put myself through that.
Yeah.
And it's not even the idea of everybody you will meet in every lobby is horrible.
Right.
But enough are. And it's enough of a risk. And I have so many other games. So why do it? And then the good die young, bastards live forever, they say in the community.
Right. Well, I think also for me, like, I only really like engaging in online gaming that has a cooperative element. It's why I played World of Warcraft and why I've played other MMOs online, why I played Destiny. Like, you know, some competitive multiplayer shooters like Halo and a few others weren't as bad for a lot of the community because there was just a lot of playful back and forth. But for the most part, if I can't play something cooperatively online, I don't have much desire to play it. And I think that's a bummer. I think it's kind of smart, at least. It's handicapping, but also kind of smart that Nintendo doesn't allow immediate online chat on their system. You have to choose to do it. And like, while with someone who has a Discord channel and has, other voice chat services, I would like it to be more accessible. But to the same thing, you have young people playing this game, and I know the capacity of hurt and pain that other gamers can cause. So it definitely makes sense if you're playing Smash Brothers in a large group, but you don't want to hear something obscene to restrict easy access to the communication.
Well, and it also allows new ways to communicate.
Right.
Because there is that idea of no matter what form of communication you allow, lowest common denominator will happen. Law of averages. You allow doodles on the Me network, people are going to draw dicks. But if you don't allow voice chat and Splatoon, you can't make any obscene gestures. And even if you're frustrated with somebody, every fuck word you yell is for you alone or anybody within earshot of you. I don't have to hear it. You don't have to hear mine. I mentioned playing Journey in a recent episode, and I enjoy the intriguing connection aspect that it has with other live players, but you can't draw dicks in the sand. And I think that's for the best.
Yeah.
There's different levels here.
Yeah, I think that what frustrates me as a modern gamer with a brain, and not to say that all of these people don't have brains, but I'm sort of saying that.
We all have brains, but some people choose to shut them off or fall back onto something reflexive or reactive.
Well, I remember when World of Warcraft first announced that they were linking Battle.net to Facebook and some other things, and so your real name would be displayed. People lost their minds. And my thought was, I don't care. Mm-hmm. It's me. That's my personality, and that's me, so I don't care, because also I act like a civil human being on these sites.
Now, some of that might have to do with the fact that being easily tracked online can lead to some very unfortunate situations, not having to do with behavioral accountability.
True. These are the people who are like hateful on forums going, oh, now you'll know my name. Like,
Yeah.
you should be held accountable for the shitty things you say.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's that.
And, you know, I mean, it goes back to social media and all that, too. And this idea that people are bolder online. Like, some of the shit that people comment on YouTube would never say to the creator's face. Why would you...
Yeah.
Why would you say that? But it's because they don't see it as the same thing, because there's this disconnect. And I think that's what a lot of the gaming language is rooted in too, is they're using hurtful language because to them, they're just words. And I don't know these people. And there's this mile.
And they should grow a thick skin, and they should just get over it. And they should then, if you are using hurtful language, but you think they should just get over it, you are just not taking accountability for your actions. And this is why you're mad. We can know your real name now.
Right.
And so the difficulty here is it requires choosing kindness.
Right.
And there are people out there in every community who are unfailingly supportive. And those are amazing people. They are unsung heroes. Even when they are lauded, they are unsung heroes. And it could be very difficult when frustrated by either somebody not playing up to your standards, or you're not playing up to your own standards, or letting whatever stresses bleed into whatever you're doing for play, to forget to choose kindness. And that's why I also say that we all have brains, even the people that don't seem to have them. But whatever choice or not choice, we just switch them off when we go online. And that does everybody a disservice.
Sure. And I mean, not making a choice is a choice at the end of the day.
Yes, it is.
As well as ignoring everything else around you. I mean, look, I'm not a person who doesn't believe, like we said earlier, in trash talk and talking shit. You know, often the people I love most, I make fun of the most. It's how I show that I care about somebody. But also, if I ever say something to offend somebody, the minute I've been told that I offended them, I want to make it up to them. You know,
Right.
I don't want to continue. And I think where a lot of this hurtful online gaming community is born from is people who just have no sympathy for others. You know, the gamer stereotype about a guy alone in his basement is born out of some truth. There are some people who cut themselves off from social interaction, so they don't quite understand the weight of what they say.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that that's always even to their own fault. But I also don't hear enough people championing the right thing to do and speaking up louder about how to better act in these online communities. And one thing I am thankful for about Blizzard is at BlizzCon and at these events and all of these face-to-face and talkbacks they talk about having a supportive community and supporting each other and building together and trying to make things together and not tear each other down.
You can build greater things if you're helping each other out.
Yeah, it's stepping on the back of the person in front of you is not going to get you that much further.
Lobster buckets. If you don't know what it is, look it up.
Okay, I'll Google it.
Oh, it's just the idea that like if you can keep lobsters in a bucket, you don't have to put a net on top of it because they're going to keep trying to climb on top of each other and pull each other back down.
Interesting.
Yep. I know this from an Aquabat song.
Shocking. This is surprising to me.
Ska is surprisingly educational.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that it's also important to talk about the online gaming community because you can do some really innovative and great things with it when you think outside the box. You were talking about some games where you can leave yourself notes or leave notes for other people. Dark Souls, one of the coolest things that the Dark Souls series has done is you can invade other people's games and kill each other, but you can also leave notes on the ground for people to find. And I think the most clever way to mess with somebody, though sometimes cruel, is like people will leave notes saying secret this way and it's a boss room, or like treasure this way and it's a cliff, or something like that. And like the idea, like trolling as an experience and as a concept is, I would say, mostly negative. But I will say that messing with gamers in that way in a game that teaches you to not trust everything you read in a place where anyone can write anything is kind of a valuable lesson to learn, and also I think is at least a more interesting way of engaging with people. And if you want to mess with them a little bit or challenge people, That's an interesting way of doing it. And, of course, everyone's different, and some people may be doing it just to be dicks. But at the end of the day, it's kind of neat. Like, if, one guy leaves a note saying a treasure's this way and there isn't, but then another guy does and there is. It's an interesting way for the online community to engage without being able to talk to each other directly.
And there's a lot of games nowadays where people are able to enjoy or even build upon each other's creations.
Yeah.
You can't really, you can leave some comments on a Super Mario Maker level. And you're not necessarily leaving a comment per se if whenever you die, a little X shows up for all the places people died. That creates not unintentional, but a silent solidarity of, well, either I died where so many others did it, or, well, I'm the first one to die here. That's fun.
Yeah.
And games like Minecraft, where there can be conflict, or there could be collusion, there can be cooperation, or there could be competition. Depending upon what server people go on and what people have and people use, that is another game where you can see the best and worst of people, as it were.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, I want to have fun. And if something you're saying or doing is impeding that fun, maybe it's something we should address.
Yes.
Now, again, as I said, my more recent experiences with people using, to take it back to what started the conversation, using the word rape as an aggressive term to equate to decimation in a game. A lot of the people in my inner circle of people that I know that have used that word have used it out of gaming habit and is something that's familiar to me. And when I've called them on it, they have apologized or they have said they won't use it again, which shows that they understand, even in that moment, if they didn't understand that word had meaning and had pain behind it, they did after.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where it's a well-worn groove, and this hobby reaches further back into our history than maybe several others can or do. And we'll do these things out of actual ignorance. Some people will do them out of actual malice, and I don't like them. But a lot of times something is just simply done out of ignorance.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think people can change and people can evolve and certainly be better than their past selves. I've done so many things in my life that I am not proud of, but I can't go back in time and change them. I can't. Certainly not yet. Technology isn't there. And honestly, all of my choices, good and bad, have led me to be right here, right now. And
Right.
I'm pretty okay with that. And so what can you do but move on? It's there is that purity culture problem of everybody's going to make mistakes and you have to accept that. But also that includes accepting our own mistakes.
Yeah.
And that means looking at the language that seemed like a really good idea when we were 12 years old. What I would say in a Magic the Gathering match amongst my friends when I was in middle school is nothing I should say online.
Yeah, that's
for
definitely
so
true.
many reasons. And I'd like to think in the past 20 years, I've become smarter than that. And I need to accept that I can be so that I can move past it.
But also the onus is on us, the mistake makers, as well.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, we also have to, we can't, I am someone who admittedly can be very defensive. When my spouse calls me on some bullshit that I may have said or done, sometimes my reaction is to get angry and loud instead of actually taking in the criticism. And that's not good, and I'm trying to improve that. And I think that's something we can all learn from and find very important. If someone calls you out on something shitty you did, don't rail against them saying they don't know you or that, what do they have the right?
Yeah.
Think for a second. If what they're saying is really unfathomable or is incorrect, then have discourse. But I think at the end of the day, if someone's calling you on something that could be considered hurtful or something you shouldn't be saying, take it into consideration and make an active change. Nobody changes overnight. I still misgender friends of mine who are non-binary, and that's on me. If they are more femme presenting a lot of the time, I often slip and call them she. And that's nothing they've done. That's on me. But I always apologize, and I always say that I'm trying to do better and that I'm learning and that I'm trying to not get, it's undoing a certain amount of thing that's instilled in you, like we were talking about. And most of the time when I engage in that way, if I misgender someone and I apologize, rarely are they upset with me. Most of the time they thank me for trying.
Yeah, and you don't need to make a big deal out of it. A simple, you acknowledge, I screwed up, and then you don't make a big deal out of it or try to explain why you did it wrong or whatever. You just do better next time.
Yeah. And that's a big part of it too, is the over explaining yourself. This idea that on these online communities you have this righteous fury and this need, this indignation to believe that whatever you did is right and that there's nothing that can convince you otherwise. Nobody is right 100% of the time. No one.
Right.
We are all capable of making mistakes. And I think it's important, especially in something that can be so supportive like the gaming community, to acknowledge that as often as we can.
It can be so supportive. Just look at Pokemon Go.
Yes.
And like I said before, things that are humorous or hurtful, what determines it is the reaction of the recipient. The burden of proof should not fall to them.
No.
And so if it's brought to you that you said something that they found hurtful, well, you have a choice to ignore it, dig in deeper, be louder about it, defend your choice, or, if you didn't know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't know that, and then off you go. You try not to do it again.
I think you're mentioning Pokemon Go is actually a great example of, now again, me and Geoff are two middle age approaching white dudes, so we only have a limited purview of experience, and we have a ton of privilege. But when Pokemon Go came out, it was one of the first times that I was out in public and actually engaging in groups and recognizing groups of people who were playing and looking to interact with other people I didn't know just because of something that was building a community. And it was really unlike anything I'd ever seen. Now, again, I am not a woman. I am not a person of color. And so engaging in groups of people you don't know can be very different for those kinds of people. Whereas for me, I have a certain level of privilege that allows me to engage at a certain level. That said, I still thought it was fascinating that these groups of people who didn't know each other were gathering in all these different places to just engage with each other because they liked this game.
Right. And that is such a great example of what good a gaming community can be. And whatever level of privilege you may or may not have, we are also dealing with strangers. And so there should be an acceptable level of, I'm going to screw some stuff up. You're not great at a game the first time you boot it up. You are not going to get a conversation right if you can even do such a thing the first time you interact with somebody. And so you need to accept that. I mean, I do. This is second person advice to myself, that you need to accept you're going to misstep, and that's okay. We need to accept that in ourselves. We need to accept that in others, and that doesn't just stop in the realm of gaming, but we're talking big talk right now, I guess, and so that's a start.
Yeah, I think that also there's a fair amount of entitlement in gaming. Now, again, as a person who is definitely advertised to the most directly when it came to games, I have a very different experience than, other people that we know who, are female identifying or are people of color, where not every game character and hero looked like them. And so, I always try and diversify what I engage in and also try and understand other perspectives. One thing that me and MJ bring up often on Reignite, which is another certain point of view podcast, shameless plug, is that, when we're talking about, sexuality and, these characters that we interact with, we also make it clear we're talking about it from a very privileged perspective, and that we are not, and that the language used by other characters when addressing you could feel way more aggressive or harmful if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if,
It's true.
any member of our community that has been put through great difficulty, language used towards them can change dramatically based on your own experiences and perspectives. And so I think with gaming online, it's the same thing. Like I only have the smallest experience of what it's like to engage in gaming as a woman on the internet. And it was when I played World of Warcraft, one of my favorite characters that I played was a woman. And it's because I liked the design of the female character. I believe it was a night elf. And so I created a female character. And like some of the shit that people would say to you because they perceive you as a woman and they think they have the right to say was disgusting. And again, it's only a fraction of what I'm sure other women on the internet deal with that I don't. But it was definitely something that even for the briefest of moments experiencing it was awful, you know?
Yeah.
And there's not always a clear way out or a clear, because at that point, when something like that, when harassment's happening online, it shouldn't fall on the person being harassed to make the change. It's expected of the community to make the change and not harass those people.
Yeah, and this is why we chase our tail and run around in circles on it, unfortunately.
Right. There's no right answer. There are many right answers, but I know for a fact that starting with yourself, if you can look at yourself and what you do online and truly, honestly appraise how you interact online and acknowledge things that you might have done that were a mistake or that, didn't come out right. I think it's the first step at least, because we can only start by fixing ourselves. And if we can get that under wraps, then you can start looking towards changing the community.
Yeah, if you are the biggest part of your world. When people talk about the world being cruel, the world being mean, the world being vulgar, the gaming world being harsh, that none of us speak for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, even on this podcast, we make broad, generalized statements. We're not speaking for everybody. These are abstracts based in experience and some statistics, the ones that we choose to find and work with, mostly experience. And so we can't ignore the fact that we are a part of whatever world we are in. And so when we say that the world is cruel, we're giving ourselves an excuse to be cruel. If we can say the world can be kind, we're giving ourselves that reason, that support, that excuse. And yeah, if you make a change within yourself and you're part of the community, you are making a huge change for your experience. And if we all do that a little bit, that's sweeping change. That's idealistic, but damn it, I'd like that.
Yeah, I don't think we're beyond change. And I mean, all of these machines move slowly. I mean, we're still struggling in media, especially TV and movies, to get more representation of all different kinds.
Right.
But it is moving. Probably not fast enough for a lot of people, and which is legit as well.
Because again, we've got millions, billions of people that are all recipients of this exposure. And so everyone's going to feel it differently. And no matter how much we want to think so, no aspect of this is linear.
Yeah.
So there's going to be steps forward. There's going to be steps back. But again, how are we, how are speedruns developed? By failing thousands, millions of times. You find all the ways that don't work so that you learn the ways that do. And if we are able to support and listen to each other, we can find those ways faster. So kids, with me leaning on the back of my chair, if you want a high score at your online interactions, look to your community.
That might be the cheesiest thing you've ever said on the show.
Yes, it is.
At least to this date.
And I really wanted to channel Captain America in Spider-Man Homecoming.
I felt it. I felt it.
Great.
In my core. But yeah, and of course, anyone listening now, please tell us about either shit that's gone down in your community that is unacceptable, that you want to shine a light on, or just as equally, maybe things that you've experienced that you've done that you feel sorry for and want to get out into the world, that you do regret those actions and those mistakes you made. All of that stuff is valid.
Yeah. And I'm aware that I didn't get too deep into dumb, vulgar, horrible things I've done when I was younger. And if people want to know, I'll try to remember what I've done and put some stuff up.
Yeah, we're absolutely always willing to communicate. We are not perfect people.
We're not.
And by no means project that we are either. Well, Geoff sometimes does. But, he's very handsome, so it's hard for him.
It is. It's a curse.
But we of course, as always, want to keep this conversation going. And to that, actually, before we wrap things up, I want to remind everybody listening that we actually now, Certain Point of View Media has their own Discord server. We've posted invites on the certain point of view page as well as on our own page. We will repost those links because they expire after a time. But please join us. There are tons of channels, breakouts to talk about game recommendations, about things going on in your life, about the episodes we've recorded. We, as always, talk about generating community with this podcast, and we would love to have you on our Discord server chatting with us, either live and in person or just via the chat channels.
I've mostly been doing the chat channels. For whatever reason, I'm very slow to get into community stuff, but I want it. And I'm happy that we have a place, another avenue to keep this conversation going.
And of course, if you are unfamiliar with Certain Point of View, they are the media network that we are a part of course, with the flagship show, Certain Point of View, which is a most of the time Star Wars podcast, sometimes other nerdy stuff podcast, hosted by Ben and Addie. We also have another pass with Case Aiken, which me, Geoff, and everyone else in the world has been a guest on at this point, which is a lot of people.
Yeah.
Which he takes on movies and takes another pass at movie scripts, good, bad, or indifferent. We have, of course, Reignite, which I mentioned earlier, which I am a host with MJ, and we take a deep dive into a 10-year-old video game called Mass Effect. I'm sure you've heard of it. And subsequently, hopefully the rest of the trilogy, to discuss the inner workings of the game and how our choices in the game matter and reflect upon us. And then, of course, finally, the Scruffy Nerf Herders podcast, which is a Star Wars D20 story DM'd by Case Aiken, where a ragtag group of rebels try not to blow themselves up.
Yep, it's very entertaining. More or less.
More or less, yeah. So check out all that stuff at certainpointofview.com. Also, of course, you can find us wherever you find podcasts. You can, of course, communicate with me and Geoff directly on the Twitters, Facebook, wherever you find your podcasts. We love hearing from you guys. It's why we do this show. I love our interaction on Twitter and Facebook. You guys have been great. Also, if you are listening right now, consider writing us a recommendation on Facebook or a review on iTunes. It helps us to get featured and grow our audience. Thank you.
Yes, we like making this as large and inclusive and welcoming of a conversation as possible. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.